am sharp. Let me declare open session of the Dissertation Council for the Defense of Thesis by Stamboleva of the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Academic Specialization 130002, Theory and Methods of Training, Russian as Foreign Language on the theme, Formation of Linguistic and Professional Competence of Greek Guides, Interpreters, when teaching the Russian language on the basis of the integral approach, level B1. Of March 2020, number 2405/1, me, Moskovkin Leonid Viktorovich, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Russian as a Foreign Language and its teaching methodology at St. Petersburg University, was appointed chairman of this dissertation council. Members of the dissertation council were appointed by the same order, and let me introduce them. Under the order of St. Petersburg University of the 23rd of March 2020, number 2304/1, our meeting is held in the remote access mode, which includes my colleagues, members of the council, and the applicant. Tarnaeva Larissa Petrovna, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of Foreign Languages and Linguodidactics of St. Petersburg University. Larissa Petrovna, can you see and hear us? Please turn the sound on. Thank you. Almazova Nadezhda Ivanovna, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor, Director of the Humanitarian Institute of St. Petersburg Polytechnic University, named after Peter the Great. Nadezhda Ivanovna, can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you. Bagramova Nina Vitalyevna, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Foreign Education Methods at Erzen, Russian State Pedagogical University. Nina Vitalyevna, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can hear and see you. Protaseva Ekaterina Yurievna, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Associate Professor, Department of Languages, University of Helsinki, Finland. Ekaterina Yurievna, can you see and hear us? Yes, the answer is positive. And the degree applicant, Stamboleva Zinaida Anatolyevna, can you see us? Can you hear us? Yes, thank you. I can see and hear you. Thank you. Also, the academic advisor of the applicant, Fedotova Nina Leonidovna, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Associate Professor, Department of Russian as a Foreign Language and its teaching methodology at St. Petersburg University. Nina Leonidovna, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you. All the members of the Dissertation Council, as well as the degree applicant, are present. We can all see and hear each other. Dear colleagues, since our meeting is held in the remote access mode, under St. Petersburg University, dated the 23rd of March 2020, number 2304/1, I invite all the participants to follow the procedure in case of a technical failure. If you stop seeing or hearing someone, please inform me immediately. I will call a technical break until such issues are eliminated. If the connection with me is lost, I would like to ask Tarnaeva Larissa Petrovna, who is next on the list, to call a technical break. And if the connection with me is not re-established, to preside at the meeting. Larissa Petrovna, do you agree? Please turn the microphone on. Yes, I agree. Thank you, Larissa Petrovna. Dear council members, do you mind? No, we don't. Thank you. Let us continue. To improve the quality of communication, dear colleagues, please keep your microphones switched off, but remember to turn them on when you're given the floor. Let me also inform you that our meeting is being recorded and broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website, and the speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English. The applicant's page currently displays an email address to which during our session, all the listeners of the Dissertation Council session may send their opinions and questions to the degree applicant online regarding thesis and the ongoing scientific discussion. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical department, and I shall read them during the discussion. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and the content of her thesis, and must include the full name, position, and place of employment of the author of the question. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion or to the discussion of the thesis, to the text or evaluation of the thesis shall not be presented. In accordance with the order of awarding at St. Petersburg University the degree of Candidate of Science or Doctor of Science, approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, a session of the Dissertation Council is considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved composition of the Dissertation Council, but not less than 4 persons, take part in its work. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 members. 5 members are present, all in the remote interactive mode. Audio-visual contact has been established with all of them. Thus, there is a quorum. I instruct the curator of the defense officer of the Dissertation Council Activity Support Department, Rubtsova Natalia Yurievna, to draw up the attendance list in which the Dissertation Council members present shall be recorded and to indicate their work mode, in this case, remote. Let me set forth the following procedure of today's session with the approximate duration of 2 hours. First, the chairman's summary report on the main content of documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with the applicable regulations. Answers to possible questions, 5 minutes. A brief presentation by the degree applicant outlining the key points of her study, approximately 15 minutes. 3. Questions to the applicant strictly on her report, no more than 2 minutes per each question. 4. Answers of the applicant, maximum 5 minutes for all the questions. 5. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn with their reviews, with end speech of the applicant, with no more than 10 minutes for each speaker. I would like to, I shall mention that later. Dear colleagues, please let's stick to the time frame. Speech of the chairman, item 6, with his review, approximately 10 minutes. 7. Answers of the applicant to questions and comments, not for more than 5 minutes. 8. Presentation by the chairman of questions to the applicant sent during the discussion of his presentation and the scientific discussion on broadcasting the meeting at the university website. 9. Answers of the applicant, not more than 2 minutes per each question. 10. Speech of the academic advisor of the applicant, not more than 3 minutes. 11. Discussion of the Dissertation Council members before the open voting, during which the sound shall be switched off, approximately 5 minutes. 12. Open individual voting. In counting the votes by the chairman of the Dissertation Council, the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. 13. A decision on awarding or not awarding the St. Petersburg University academic degree. 14. Closing remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have any objections or questions to this procedure? if there are any questions. If we have no questions, let us continue. If there are no objections, let me start running the procedure. First of all, I invite you to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you for your understanding. This is important. And let me start the procedure. The floor is given to the academic advisor of Stamboleva Zinaida A, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Associate Professor, Department of Russian as a Foreign Language and its teaching methodology at St. Petersburg University, Fedotova Nina Leonidovna, who will introduce the degree applicant to us. Nina Leonidovna, the floor is yours. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, dear attendees, let me introduce Zinaida A, Stamboleva, who is a degree applicant at St. Petersburg University, Department of Russian as a Foreign Language and its teaching methodology, finished her thesis on affirmation of linguistic and professional competences of Greek guide interpreters when teaching the Russian language on the basis of integral approach. The results of her thesis today are presented for your to your attention. Thank you, Nina Leonidovna. And now I will also provide some information. The thesis by Zinaida A for the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Academic Specialization 13-0002, Theory and Methods of Training and Education, Russian as a Foreign Language, on the theme, Formation of Linguistic and Professional Competence of Greek Guides Interpreters, and Teaching the Russian Language on the basis of the Integral Approach Level B1, was accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, dated the 25th of March, 2020, number 2408/1. Stamboleva Zinaida Anatolovna wrote her thesis at St. Petersburg University. Her academic advisor is Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Associate Professor, Department of Russian as a Foreign Language and its teaching methodology at St. Petersburg University, Fedotova Nina Leonidovna. The number of publications which set out the main scientific results of her thesis, according to the enclosed list, is 3. In peer-reviewed scientific journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Education, Science of the Russian Federation, 3. In journals indexed in the Web of Science and Scopus Science databases, 0 publications. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full package of documents for acceptance of the thesis for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the Order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information I received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the Office of the Dissertation Council Support Department, curator of today's session, Rubtsova Natalia Yurievna, who's currently in touch with us. Therefore, I give the floor to the degree applicant. Do you, dear council members, have any general questions to the applicant? And is it necessary to disclose and review the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant for defense? Nina Vitalyevna, I don't think there is a need. Larissa Petrovna? No, this is not necessary. Nadezhda Ivanovna? I support my colleagues. This is not necessary. Katerina Yurievna? No, this is not necessary. Thank you. Yes, of course. We fully trust staff of the Dissertation Council Support Department. In that case, let me ask Zinaida Anatolovna, the degree applicant, to talk about her thesis. Tell us about her thesis. Okay. Let me start the presentation, right? I beg your pardon. Well, dear Chairman of the Dissertation Council, dear Dissertation Council members, dear attendees, let me offer to your attention a thesis devoted to issues of professionally oriented teaching Russian as a foreign language in a non-linguistic environment in conditions of early specialization. In recent years, the need to rethink the goals, objectives, and content of teaching Russian as a foreign language is evident. Today, one of the most important tasks of teaching Russian as a foreign language is achieving a high level of not only communicative but also professional competence. Unfortunately, a solution to this problem is significantly hampered by a number of serious challenges, which include, for example, absence of modern textbooks that allow implementation of personal and action-oriented ethnic, cultural, and problem content approaches in teaching Russian to foreigners. The aim of my study is to develop a methodology for formation of linguistic and professional competencies of Greek students, future interpreters, guides, level B1, based on the integrated approach that takes into account the interrelated principles of competence, problem, context, and ethnic cultural approaches to teaching Russian as a foreign language. From our point of view, the effective formation of the foreign language linguistic professional competence of future guides, interpreters, is ensured by taking into account the mutually conditioned motivational value, activity, cognitive, emotional, and reflexive components of the learning processes. The motivational value component ensures a steady interest in the chosen profession. The activity component is related to language and speech competencies. The cognitive emotional component implies adaptation of psychological features to the requirements of the chosen profession. The reflexive component is responsible for mastering the skills of self-control. Selection of content should take into account peculiarities of the national communicative behavior of the students. Content and structure of the manual imply orientation towards mastering professionally relevant communication strategies and skills. In the course of the study, we identify problems existing in the Russian as foreign language training system in Greece, the most important of which are the reason for differences between the national educational system of Russia and Greece, and weak development of the methodological issues of professionally oriented language training for future guides, interpreters who speak Russian. In the course of my study, we analyzed and clarified modern approaches to understanding the essence of foreign language communication competence of the future interpreter guide, which made it possible to determine its structure. The lingua professional competence includes three sub-competences: language subcompetence, a set of knowledge about phonetic, lexical, and grammatical systems of the language under study, knowledge of foreign professional terminology. The speech subcompetence, a set of knowledge providing communicative interaction in the professional activity of a guide interpreter. The cultural competence, knowledge of historical and cultural peculiarities of the country of the language under study. The content of social linguistic competence, which includes social and intercultural subcompetence, is the knowledge of ways of establishing social interaction with carriers of the other culture, ways of transformation of speech samples depending on the communication conditions, as well as tolerance to other nationalities, cultures, religions, and the strategic competence, knowledge of communicative strategies used in the foreign cultural models of behavior. With a view of developing a national-oriented manual textbook for Greek students, future guides, interpreters. A questionnaire was used in order to identify features of the national communication behavior of Greeks. It should be noted that such studies have not been previously conducted by Russian researchers. The following features of Greek communicative behavior: active use of figurative, expressive, and emotional means of the language, no desire for conciseness and ultimate precision, expressive, non-verbal behavior, but tactful, polite, and ethical, more pronounced complementarity as compared to those in the Russian culture. The results of a survey of Greek students suggest that the absolute majority of future guides interpreters strive to maintain their intercultural speech contact. Based on the principles, we selected training guides interpreters in Russian as a foreign language. We tried to develop a professionally oriented simulation training model, which is shown in this slide. Taking into account peculiarities of behavior of Greeks, we developed a nationally and professionally oriented textbook, I Am Your Guide. The first part of the textbook was published in 2020. The textbook is based on the simulated professional model, which implements the principles of authenticity, interactivity, problem content of training, modeling, specific conditions of communication, etc. The content of the manual is presented by topics which are characterized by professional and national specific features. To confirm the hypothesis of the study, a methodological experiment was carried out on the basis of National University of Cappadocia at Athens. The experiment was attended by 60 students of the foreign language department. The experimental group used the textbook I'm Your Guide, aimed at forming the linguistic and professional competence of Greek students in teaching Russian, level B1. Students of the control group study used a textbook, The Road to Russia. Before the beginning of the experiment, we conducted entrance testing of students of the control and experimental group. Data obtained indicate that students in both groups have a rather low level of formation of communication competence in the Russian language. The students had difficulties in choosing communication tactics in the proposed problem situations. Answers were simple, almost no detailed statements. A large number of language errors was recorded in the answers. Parameters of assessment of the foreign language linguistic professional competence are professionally significant personal qualities, ability to solve problems related to the professional activity of a guide, skills to design a statement in a foreign language. The final test no quality improvement in the formation of the components of lingual professional competence of the students of the experimental group. Thus, the study allows us to draw a conclusion about the effectiveness of the integrated approach to the formation of the linguistic and professional competencies of the future guides interpreters studying Russian at Greek universities. Thank you very much for your attention. Dear colleagues, can you hear me? We can't hear you very well. Thank you, Zinaida Anatolyevna. We can't hear you well. Your voice is disappearing. Yes. voice is disappearing. Hold on 1 second. Something is wrong. Can you hear me now? Yes. Still, the sound is not good. Do you have any questions to the applicant? No, we don't. No. Nadezhda Ivanovna, do you have questions to the applicant? Ekaterina Yurievna, do you have questions to the applicant? No. In that case, dear colleagues, since we don't have questions, I would like to inform you that we did not receive any external reviews, and that is why now we may proceed to reading the reviews of the Dissertation Council members. Larissa Petrovna, please present your review of the thesis by Zinaida A Stamboleva. First, I'd like to say that the thesis seemed to be very interesting, even considering all the discussion points which always occur when reading a serious thesis. You always get there will certainly be questions and issues, but for me, it was very interesting to read the opinion, to learn about the opinion of the author, who quite clearly explains things in her thesis. I'd like to say that first of all, what appealed to me most in this thesis is the fact that the author focuses on, in the very beginning of the thesis, the author focuses on the fact that the Russian language, with the growing image of Russia, is regaining its importance in the world. And I looked up some information, and the first pages of the thesis made me think about this and look up some sources, and so I found some facts that so it was interesting to learn that according to a recent study of public study conducted by European Commission, Russian language takes 4th place by popularity after English, German, and French by the number of people who claimed to speak Russian. The number is quite significant. So one should mention that in this respect, in this regard, this thesis can promote popularity of the Russian language. And as the author says, the popularity at schools and universities in Europe is growing. And in this situation, the use of efficient forms and methods of teaching Russian language as a foreign language is one of the most relevant spheres of teaching English. And the fact that the author, Zinaida Anatolievna, deals with the problem of teaching Russian to future guide interpreters in Greece manifests relevance and the great practical potential of the work, because Greece is one of the most popular destinations for Russian tourists. So training guides who speak Russian is an important vector of professional education in Greece. And of course, it should attract attention of methodologists, of authors, textbook authors from Russia. I believe that is highly relevant is the attention the author pays to the problem of status of the Russian language in Greece as one of the European countries, which is now developing economic, cultural, political, and religious connections with Russia. The author also mentions that focuses on factors that have both positive and negative impact on teaching Russian at Greek universities. And she identifies the social, economic, culturally determined, and linguo-didactic issues as the main culturally determined problem, challenge of teaching Russian to Greek students is the presence of stereotypes about Russia that have a major impact on the students. And in her work, Zinaida Anatolievna pays a lot of attention on dealing with these quasi-stereotypes with the help of certain methods described in her textbook and the methodology that she proposes. The author quite rightly focuses on differences of verbal and non-verbal behavior of Greek speakers of Greek, saying that these differences can lead not only to mistakes of speech, but result in intercultural conflicts. And understanding all the difficulties of teaching Russian to Greek students brings the author to the idea that overcoming these difficulties may promote establishment of a nationally oriented means of teaching. Among the good methodological proposals is the improved model of foreign language communicative competence of future guides and interpreters, the motivation, value, activity, and cognitive emotional component of the communicative competence. The author complements with the reflexive component, which includes skills of critical analysis, self-control during professional activity, constant professional growth and development, and the author quite rightly suggests that complex development of all the components of the communication competence will increase the level of integral characteristics. One of the positive sides of the work is developing principles of textbook for teaching Russian to Greek guides. The principles are presented in on a fairly wide scale, and the author divides them into several groups: general, didactical, psychological, linguistic, and methodological. And I'd like to especially emphasize some of them. Principle of which the author calls the integration principle, or the inter-subject connections. Here, I disagree that integration and inter-subject are not synonyms, but judging by how the author describes these principles, I think this is the principle of inter-subject relations. And the value of the principle is that the learner can learn two things, linguistic and professional. And in the framework of a linguistic unit, I think it's good that the models suggested by the author includes teaching more in genres of the excursion discourse, and it seemed interesting to me that the author focuses and describes these genres in detail, genre of information, giving instruction, welcome, convincing, invitation. So the author shows, so these are lingual professional orientation. It's also important that the main is knowledge in narrow professional subjects such as history of ancient Rus, introduction to Slavic literature, book and historiography, cultural ties of a native country. Among the methodological principles, I'd like to mention the comparison of contacting cultures, which, according to the author, should destroy stereotypes and promote a positive image of Russia and Russians, and to formation of a comprehensive system of intercultural communication in the typical situations of professional communication. Principles presented by the author in the first type of the study formed the basis of the methodology of formation of linguistic and professional competence in the future guide. To identify ways for optimization of the process of this competence in the given conditions, the author identified national features of communication behavior of Greek-speaking guides. Here, I think, well, the good point of the thesis is that the author identified peculiarities of communication behavior in comparison with peculiarities of communication behavior of speakers of Russian. And in order to identify these national peculiarities, the author interviewed Greek-speaking students, which I think is an interesting method. And by analyzing the results, the author identified peculiarities of the national communication behavior of Greek-speaking guide, and as which should know understanding them will minimize risk in the intercultural communication. So this can also be seen in the textbook written by the author, and the peculiarities of this communication behavior were considered when developing a system of exercises. Larissa Petrovna, we have the time. Please remember the time limit. I'm getting to the to my questions. So in my opinion, developing a textbook is a strength of the thesis, but with all the good points, I would like to ask the author some questions. So maybe a recommendation. So one of them is, which seemed necessary to me, is there is a certain contradiction in the composition of the thesis, is a formation of linguistic and professional competence, but in the text of the thesis is the communicative competence in the foreign language, which is quite good, but the theme is linguistic and professional. I understand that most probably this happened because the author wanted to approach her subject from a wide angle. And my second comment is, it will be interesting to know why lingual professional competence is not in your focus, and communication competence. The second question is, speaking of questionnaires, you interviewed 50 Greek-speaking students. So I have a question like, was the sample sufficient? If your sample included only 50 people, is it possible to judge on specific features of the national communication behavior after interviewing only 50 people? And a third question is more of a recommendation for the future. Well, there's some issues with terminology, for example, communicative competence and competentness. Next aspects of communication, communicative competence, and pages as lingua professional. So here, I think it's necessary to, in the future, to be more precise. But so these questions do not mean my opinion is negative as of the work conducted by the author. And so these questions, maybe I asked them in order for further development of this interesting issue, to encourage further development of this theme, which has a great potential. I think this is a substantial scientific work dedicated to relevant methodological issues characterized by scientific novelty, has theoretical and practical significance, and provides solutions to some tasks significant for the modern theory and methodology of teaching Russian as a foreign language. A thesis by Stamboleva Zinaida A on the theme formation of linguistic and personal competence of Greek-speaking guard interpreters corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order of the 1st of September, the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the degree applicant Stamboleva Zinaida A deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, specialization 130002, theory and methods of teaching Russian as a foreign language. Thank you. Thank you. I beg your pardon for taking so much of your time. Larissa Petrovna, thank you very much. I would like to ask Zinaida Anatolievna, how would you like to answer the questions? Would you like to answer all questions at once? I would like to answer all the questions at once. That's excellent. Dear colleagues, I'd like to inform you that we have this time limit, 10 minutes for each speaker. That means that we don't have to read our reviews, which have been published at the university website. Please focus on the main strong points and drawbacks that we should discuss. So you don't have to read the entire review. And I would like to Nadezhda Vitalyevna Almazova to join our discussion. Dear colleagues, I read the thesis very carefully. I also studied the textbook and articles published by the degree applicant, and she worked very hard and achieved good results. And now I'd like to express my attitude. The thesis by Stamboleva Zinaida A deals with a linguodidactic Linguididactics as teaching Russian as a foreign language to Greek-speaking students. Plan to work in the sphere of tourism with Russian-speaking tourists, which is very important. As has already been mentioned by Larissa Petrovna, interest to Russian language is obvious, but because of the growing cultural and tourist ties, and that is why methodologists and educators of teachers of Russian as a foreign language of Russian educational system facing the task of integration of the basic principles and provisions of the Russian educational system in the world educational space, including that of Greece, considering the national features, and is determined by a number of factors, such as absence of methodological provisions of teaching Russians in the modern conditions. Again, let me emphasize modern conditions, which requires command of a new methodology, a new insufficient didactic resources used in the educational process, absence of the natural language environment, and see the teaching takes place in Greece. Psychological peculiarities of the Greek students that are very important in the process of training. Formation of certain competences expressed by particular should be addressed in the conditions of optimization and intensification of the training process, which requires the Methodists additional effort to deal with these challenges. The author of the thesis also outlines specific features of teaching Russian as a foreign language to Greek-speaking students. The need to form a certain level not only of linguistics but of professional competence. And as the author emphasizes, she brings these two purposes together: professional competence and linguistic competence, which to a degree is a new thing. And all these factors which I have just mentioned, all these factors define relevance of this study. This should be emphasized because there are many studies in linguididactics, but the subject of the study is approaches to professionally oriented teaching of Greek-speaking students. But as for the provision is the methodology of formation of certain competence, which the author defines as lingua professional competence. Setting goals in terms of the competence approach emphasizes the methodological basis of the study, modern competence approach. The concept tools used by the researcher to rethinking goals, forms of interaction with the subject of the educational process, rethinking the contents of training. And I also added some definitions which are now available in my reviews. With the aim to make it short. And the author rethinks the pedagogical technology. The author bases its study on the basic provisions of the problem, contextual, and ethno-cultural approaches. Here's integration of these approaches, as noted by the author, leads to formation of the lingua professional competences, and using these approaches to their analysis and implementation in the didactical resource evidences relevance of the study and maturity of the author. A clear scientific achievement of the author is identifying issues connected with teaching Russian on the basis of retrospective analysis, with the citation teaching Russian Greece from the first Russian Greek which opened in Greece in Greece during the war with Turkey up to the present. The author analyzes challenges that are still found in the theory and practice of teaching Russian as a foreign language, including problems. So these problems were listed in the presentation. Yet, a scientific novelty of the thesis lies in theoretical characteristics which determine the ethno-psychological and linguistic peculiarities of the students who belong to a particular ethnic group. The result of this analysis is a focus on optimal for Greek-speaking students model of the training process, which includes special requirements to its contents to ensure high level of motivation and formation of competences mentioned as goals. The theoretical significance is in conclusions about requirements to contemporary didactical resources, teaching Russian as a foreign language, the main characteristics of which should be orientation to student interests, formation of linguistic and social and cultural competences that should agree with the interests of Russian Federation in the framework of establishing and strengthening the cultural ties. As the author says, teaching Russian as a foreign language should be focused on overcoming stereotypes, adequate providing information, for instance, of unique Russian history, traditions, customs, peculiarities of national vision of the world, forming a comprehensive system of concepts, knowledge about the country and its people. Such approach enables us to say that the author sticks to the dialogue of culture theory, which defines many contemporary linguistic and lingua-didactic research, which emphasizes the theoretical value. The practical value of the thesis and the author's contribution is a textbook, which was mentioned already, which reflects the concept of organization of teaching Russian to future guides. The textbook is nationally oriented. The content of the course considers communicative behavior of Greek students in the framework of dialogue of cultures. The author uses features specific to the Russian culture and includes tasks which ensure the most efficient teaching Russian is oriented at formation of phonetic and competences and linguistic skills. The textbook was developed on the basis of several approaches: communicative, personal, creative, activity. The exercises stimulate students to deal with professional challenges as professional-oriented competence. The textbook is based on the imitation professional model, based on the principles already mentioned today, and organization of activities and the contents of this thesis characterize the author of the textbook and of the thesis as a mature methodologist who can supply didactical materials to achieve particular certain goals through a system of exercises and tasks. The introduction of this resource demonstrates its efficiency in formation of required competence, and statistics seem convincing. So I mentioned the positive impressions I got from the thesis, which is very serious and which prevails in my assessment of the thesis. But also I would like to mention a number of questions or remarks, which or maybe critical remarks. By the way, as I heard the speech of Larissa Petrovna, I found that my questions are similar to questions asked by Larissa Petrovna, which means that undoubtedly they are quite significant to get answers. So first, regardless analysis of the opinion of the author on identification of two terms, competence and competentness, it seems that the author has not always managed to use them in the proper sense. Thus, in the provisions put for defense, the author speaks about the model of foreign language communicative competence of future guides. But on page 45, the title of paragraph 1.3 sounds as structure and content of foreign language communicative competence of future guides interprets. On page 48, there's table 2, the table of which also uses competence, approaches to foreign language communicative competence. And in the text of the paragraph, the author speaks about a clarified model of foreign language communicative competentness. So there are certain points where maybe the author does not clearly define these two terms. So this is my first question. How can the author comment the use of the two terms as synonyms? The second question, when stating provisions put for defense the goal and the conditions of its implementation that should be explained and grounded is the lingua professional competence. Yet the goal is not, in our opinion, is not the lingua professional competence, also mentioned by Larissa, but communication competence in a foreign language. And moreover, speaking of the theoretical significance of the study, the author is one of the achievements mentions model of foreign language communicative competence of future guides. Maybe this could be a very significant component of the methodological model suggested by the author, but there's no the connection with the education in the formation of the lingua didactic competence. Only in Article 4 of provisions put for defense, we come across some information about the parameters of assessment of lingua didactic competence, but its structure, conditions for its formation, comprehensive concept are not defined. So what is the position of the author on this? Next, third question. In the thesis, much space is dedicated to the competence approach. At the same time, mention the formation of lingua didactic competence also mentions the problem contextual and ethnocultural approaches. Unfortunately, the analysis of these approaches is very scarce. The author does not describe their basic characteristics, the main theoretical works on this issue. So my question is, what are the reasons for such discrimination? And the final question, in the list of literature, there is the author uses some sources which are over 40 and 50 years old, items 8, 19, and 30. I don't have any critical remarks to respected linguists included in this list, but they all have later or re-edited papers dedicated to this problem. In the section dedicated to foreign language communicative competence, the author relies on European competences published in 1998. A Russian translation was published in 2003. We believe that the thesis the author would have benefited if he analyzed the revised variant of this study of learning, teaching, assessment, which was published in 2018 by the European Commission. So this document contains significant additions to the problem studied by the author. Did the author take into account this work? So these are my 4 questions. They're quite long, but I hope me and Risa Petrovna will get sufficient answers. But in general, of course, these are not principal critical remarks. They should be taken into account in future work. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that the thesis by Stamboleva Zinaida Anatolievna on the theme formation of lingual professional competence of the Greek interpreter's guide, teaching Russian language on the basis of integral approach corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order on the 1st of September 2016 68/21/1 on the order awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant, Stamboleva Zinaida Anatolievna, deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Specialization 130002, Theory and Methods of Training and Education, Russian as a Foreign Language. Clause 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Nadezhda Ivanovna. I would like to give the floor to Nina Vitalyevna Bagramova. Dear colleagues, relevance of the thesis is there are several reasons proved by the author, relies on contradictions identified, the result is changing social and economic in Russia and abroad require training preference in all spheres of human activity. Special significance of the world economy and intercultural communication is getting at the moment development of professional-oriented foreign languages, including teaching Russian as a foreign language. To this problem, the thesis by Zinaida Anatolievna Stamboleva is dedicated. The immediate object of the thesis is the process of teaching Russian as a foreign language in a higher educational institution in Greece. Training professionals in the sphere of tourism, because Greece, with the growing geopolitical economic influence of Russia, Russian language is becoming more popular. On the other hand, the study of scientific and methodological literature dedicated to specific features of teaching Russian in Greece enable the author to identify issues which reduce efficiency of training. The author analyzes and comes to the conclusion and says to the need to make cardinal changes in the methodology of teaching Russian. So the purpose of the study is the methodology of linguistic and professional competence of Greek-speaking students, future guides, on the basis of the integrated approach. While introducing this competence approach in the practice of teaching foreign languages, the author suggested to rethink the basic components of the training process. So I shall not list them here. The next step to transformation of the training process is defining structure and content of a foreign language communicative competence of future guides. Certain interests is the clarified model of foreign language communicative competence of future guides, which in addition to well-known components adds another component, reflexive component, explaining that while mastering a foreign language, students always experience reflection and self-reflection. While working the model, Zinaida Anatolievna developed structure and content of lingual professional competence, which includes language, speech, and culturological components, key concepts of the study. The next stage of forming lingual professional competence, development of professional-oriented means of teaching Russian as a foreign language. Conducted analysis of textbooks and manuals used when teaching Russian language in Greek universities at the moment showed that they do not correspond to requirements applied to contemporary means of teaching. And while working on the thesis, it was necessary to rethink principles of developing professional-oriented teaching aids. So the author developed a professional-oriented system which include and allow to ensure the final objective. Principal difference of this system from the traditional is focused professional training, which means mastering two main blocks of scientific disciplines, linguistic and professional. In this regard, Zinaida A developed a list of requirements that should be met as a result of implementation of these principles. Classification of principle corresponds to the traditional. The author identifies didactical, psychological, linguistic principles. At the same time, the author widens the meaning of these principles, giving professional focus. Some points of classification call for certain doubt. For example, the didactic principle of variety exercises should be classified as the methodological principle because not every discipline can be implemented. The linguistic principle, in our opinion, also belongs to the methodological principles, speaking about organization of the training material. Same goes about status which the author psychological principles. In general, such professional-oriented organizational training process ensures optimization of process and content of performing the lingua process competence. Set in the first chapter of the thesis, find implementation in the training process dedicated to the methodology of forming lingua professional competence future guides. In the conditions of early specialization when teaching Russian as a foreign language. The textbook, I Am Your Guide, is a communicative activity type developed in accordance with the basic principles of several approaches: communicative, personal, creative, activity, and synergetic. The structure of the textbook is based on professional-oriented imitational model of training future guides based on special principles. The content is characterized by vivid professional and national specifics. Special attention is paid to structural components which carry professional load. This is the main complementary components. Thus, this textbook meets all the requirements and of the purpose of training, forming lingua professional competence of future guides. The methodology was tested in an experiment conducted very carefully, which included interviewing students and a number of exercises aimed at formation of language and professional aspect of the lingua professional competence. The results of the experiment showed significant increase of level of this competence in tested students. So all this means that the textbook under discussion is different from other means of teaching Russian as a foreign language in Greek universities. It is closely connected with theoretical provisions of the first chapter, which happens quite rarely in practice as innovation nature. An example of this is included in the process of formation of lingua professional of ethnocultural component is a set of skills in different types of speech activity. Should note the analysis of communicative behavior of students, which enables to take in very differences in communication behavior, and the fact that the new element in the process of teaching is not only the personality approach, but difference of generations in accordance with the theory of generations developed by Neelam, Hobam, and William Strauss. So this proved high novelty and high practical significance of the thesis. The author has good command and his own opinion. The conclusions of the thesis are logical and well-grounded. The thesis by Zinaida A Stamboleva is a certain contribution to the methodology of teaching Russian as a foreign language and will be in demand among students and educators. and her results can become the basis for future scientific and practical developments in the sphere of theory and methodology of teaching foreign languages. At the same time as in any series, the thesis has some points that require clarification. The first moment is a traditional and quite old problem, and I repeat what was already mentioned by my colleague, competence and competentness. Zinaida A lists a number of authors who have defined these concepts, but doesn't give reference to any of them. At the moment, she doesn't provide her own definition, and as a result, both terms are used in the work, sometimes substitute each other. Communicative competence, we come across on pages 45, 48, 49, and others, and communicative competentness on page 9, 35, 45, 55, etc. So there is a question: does the author think the two concepts are identical, which may happen? Also, there's no clarity in the use in such concepts, method, form, and for example, 43 forms include conversation, discussions, conferences, excursions, etc. And the author defines cases, brainstorm, problem situation, problem solving as methods. So why in the first we talk about form and the second about methods and approaches? Because the tour excursion in the methodological literature is used as a method of training and innovation technology by Moskovsky. And the author worked hard to review the methodology of teaching Russian as a foreign language and achieved impressive results. So there's a question: what are the further perspectives in developing the concept of the above mentioned? These comments do not affect the overall positive impression of the thesis and do not question the results. Thesis by Zinaida A. Stamboleva is an independent, complete study which possesses scientific novelty, theoretical and practical significance, aimed at solving a significant methodological problem of teaching Russian as a foreign language. The thesis by Stamboleva is on the theme of formation legal professional competence of Greek guys teaching Russian language on the basis of the integral approach. Level B1 corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant Stamboleva and Zinaida A deserves to be awarded academic degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Specialty 130002, Theory and Methods of Training and Education. Russia as a foreign language, clause 11 has not been violated. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Nina Vitalyevna. Now I would like to give the floor to Ekaterina Yurievna Protasova. You can hear me, right? Yes. According to Kostomarov, motivation for learning Russian language in the 21st century went through significant and professional competences should combine with the language. But according to Pavlenko, thinks Russian language is commodity that has certain value in the world market. We may also say that this is cultural capital, which enables to develop such fast-growing industry as tourism. Of course, there are a certain number of using Russian language, but on behavior of Russian tourists abroad, intercultural communication to satisfy such of the growing, this is definitely insufficient. Should also mention that there are textbook in tourism. Many universities have guide training programs and specific features of communication and theory of tourism, etc. There's a vast number of studies on intercultural communication, provide a considerable basis for understanding behavior of the guide dealing with international delegations. The ethics of professional behavior nowadays is a very important part of specialized training in a great number of humanitarian disciplines. This affects how exactly training a future guide involved in the sphere of intercultural communication. These provisions make the sphere of study relevant and confirm relevance of the chosen subject. But less than half of the thesis is taken by the theoretical different sources or principles of they are outlined very briefly and can be used in any other educational context, especially in the situation of teaching foreign languages. It was a shame the author did not mention a famous book, Piada, These Strange Greeks, which in many universities of Russia studied for intercultural communication with Greeks. Would also be interesting to analyze several textbooks on teaching foreign languages to Greeks and especially teaching Russian. The experimental part is an interesting comment that Greeks like to compliment, and has no specific, is more of a educational nature, and discussion situations is included in training guides. Greeks are polite and emotional. They are open to communication and make contact easily. They must to create comfortable. Page 90. In the work, answers obtain reactions to specific situations that may occur in the course of a discussion, extrapolated on the national communication behavior of course, working with a large group of tourists and working with a group individually. These are tasks addressed differently and different methods of solution. The features of communication behavior seem inappropriate when a guide is guiding 1 or 3 persons. It would be that call make especially good impression. It's an interesting comment on stereotypes, which are hard to overcome. So the author tasks so the students could study the culture of Russia in comparison with the Greek culture. Surprising that result of such work is create personality of the student who already is a university student. Focus on forming independent, responsible attitude to education, page 98. All types of oral and written work connected with activity in the sphere of tourism. So all themes and materials for discussion taken from real life. Greek guides and the interpreters working with Russian tourists characterize the textbook I Am Your Guide very positively. Unfortunately, the author did not use material of preliminary interviews, which could make significant contribution. Contemporary, from example to rule and its application for would be good to see examples of graph schemes made by the students, which according to should reflect principle of individual visualization of the popular today. So this blended classroom nature, which is used additional internet base, including classroom and home activity, complement each other. Good selection of methods of diagnostic study, which enable peculiarities of Russian speech with native Greek language when they solve cultural linguistic problems connected with future profession. Comparing results in experimental and control groups and exit tests, speech errors is a significant contribution. The study of deviation from speech in studying Russian as a foreign language. This example, at the same time, evidence that the students have mastered Russian, have good command of the Russian language. Yet it's not quite clear what's drawn with the sentence. I looked up weather forecast, tomorrow's sign, and temperature will grow. The author means the question conjunction E. Such structure is quite common. I may author you various activities. The types the word types is missing, but because of there is no correspondence to, for example, word activities in Russian, the word activities is used quite often And maybe because of students already know several languages, interference not only with the Greek, but other foreign languages. And I got several questions, which I would like the author to clarify. First, I heard that guides in historical sites and monuments in Greece are only citizens of European Union. And does that explain the need to train experts? Is it true? And what historical and economical subjects do they study? Do they have to pass exams in the Russian language? What spheres, what positions immigrants speak Russian? Do they take a test to obtain license at particular? And you several times you mentioned that Greeks possess unique characteristics of verbal, non-verbal levels, which can minimize the risks of conflicts in the intercultural cooperation, which leads to effective speech interaction with representatives of other cultures. For example, page 164. It's not quite clear what is this peculiarity, because the interview was based on solving problems connected with excursions, which is quite a common phenomenon worldwide. Also, in your test, there are different answers, which both supported and denied this. For example, some expressions seem rude and lack elementary empathy. Does that mean unique but features of speech behavior of the Greeks? In general, may say that on solid scientific base, textbook Russian for guides. The thesis by Stamboleva Zinaida A on the theme formation and legal professional competence of Greek interpreters guides when teaching Russian on the basis of integral approach B1 level corresponds to the main requirements set by the order of awarding academic degrees at Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Stamboleva Zinaida A deserves to be awarded academic degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, specialization 13-0002, theory and methodology of clause 11 of the above mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you. Thank you, Ekaterina Yurievna. Thank you very much. And the last review is mine, the chairman of the council. I'd like to say that I will not read the entire review because it's quite long and it has been published at the university website. I'd like to say that this thesis corresponds to the requirements applied to thesis in the provision, the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. It possesses relevance, scientific novelty, theoretical and practical significance. Provisions are well-grounded, validity of results, and if necessary, I can prove each provision. On the basis of this, I believe that this thesis is a scientific work which has big significance for theory and practice of teaching Russian as a foreign language. In my opinion, this work is interesting and useful. And this fact seems very important to me. The very process of training Greek-speaking guides will become more efficient if the results of this work, what was done by Zinaida Anatolovna, are implemented in teaching practices in Greece. I would like to say that this thesis is, in my opinion, is written independently. The structure of the thesis is well structured and contains new provisions, new theories. And main results of the work have been published, known to the public, published in 3 magazines, 3 publications, including the list approved by the Ministry of Science Education. So these are the positive points. Now let me proceed to my critical remarks, which and this work also for my first remark is relevance, pages 4, 5, the author doesn't mention relevance of formation of lingual professional competence of Greek-speaking guides when teaching them Russian on the basis of the integral approach. It says many interesting things about the Russian system of education. It's changing, which is nothing to do with teaching in Greece, but this point is missing. But as I said, the relevance of the work is, well, but where do we find relevance? We find relevance in the first chapter of the thesis, the first paragraph. Everything in this paragraph validates this. So here is my first remark. My second remark, in the scientific development of the theme, this mentions a number of work dedicated to various aspects of professionally oriented teaching foreign languages and Russian as a foreign language. But, and this is very good, but what I didn't like is that the author does not say exactly what results have been achieved by the authors of these works. She just says who was working on what exactly have they done? So this section demonstrates good knowledge and in this sphere, but it does not perform its main function, novelty, to prove novelty of the work, because this is the purpose of this chapter. 3, it's not clear what the author thinks considers her main achievement. In the introduction, she says that the goal of her study is to develop methodology of formation of lingual professional competence of Greek students, future guides, on the basis of the integral approach. But when the author speeches about this subject, then she means not the methodology, but approaches to professionally oriented training. So I think here there is some lack of agreement. It's not exactly the same. So there should be some, in chapter 2, which is called Methodology of Formation of Lingual Professional Competence, the author is talking about a system of exercises. The methodology is not described in full. So this chapter needs more clarity. In paragraph dedicated to experimental tests, the author describes 5 parameters of communicative competence which can be measured at the entrance and exit tests, but their qualitative and quantitative description on the basis of the final test is missing. There is an interesting diagram on page 159, results of taking the entrance and final tests, but it's not clear what were the results of the final test. It will be good to provide a table with this data on the basis of which this percentage was calculated. That would be very useful. 5, when describing the samples, the author records phonetical, lexical, and grammatical mistakes and of the students. Analysis of language mistakes takes much more space than, for example, analysis of parameters of communicative competence. In the methodological recommendations on page 170, the first point is also connected with overcoming language mistakes. So you get the impression that the author considers language competence more significant rather than communication competence, though that she states the opposite in her thesis. So these are my remarks. I still believe there's still no doubt about the results of the thesis. They don't touch upon the essence of the work, and so the work could be better. And I would. This is an interesting thesis and very useful. I would like to ask 2 questions. The first question is how is connected with what was mentioned by Larissa Petrovna and Nadezhda Ivanovna. How are connected professionally oriented communicative competence the term is used, and the lingua professional competence. I would like to know, to understand, and second, how the groups of principles is described in different pages 55, 71, and 97, 101. Are they connected or not? And conclusion of my review, the thesis by Stamboleva and Anatolina on the theme formation of linguistic and professional competence of Greek guides, interpreters, and teaching the Russian language on the basis of the integral approach, level B1, corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order, the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the author, the degree applicant, the author deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Specialization 130002, Theory and Methods of Training and Education, Russian as a Foreign Language. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. So here is my review, dear colleagues. Now let us ask the degree applicant to answer our questions. Zinaida A, please join us. I would like to thank the chairman and members of the Dissertation Council, Leonid Viktorovich Moskovsky, Nadezhda Ivanovna Almazova, Larissa Petrovna Taranaeva, Nina Vitalyevna Bagramova, and Ekaterina Pratasova for valuable questions and critical remarks. To save time, let me answer all questions or remarks at the same. The purpose of our study was to develop a methodology for the formation of linguistic and professional competence of Greek students, future tour guides, B1 level, based on the integration of competence, problem context, ethnocultural approaches. That is why we named the study of ways of such integrations as subject of our study, due to which the method of formation of linguistic and professional competences of future guides was developed. With regard to clarifying the concept of integrativeness, and we absolutely agree with the opinion that integrativeness and interdisciplinarity are not synonymous. We understand the integrative approach is an approach that combines macro and micro logic definition of the object, and this is the basis for our vision of a learning process that involves subject and language integration. The training manual, the principle of integration, is implemented in several ways: analysis of professionally oriented texts, mastering tourist discourse terminology, selection of difficult situations, lessons, dialogues, and open discussions on professional problems. Interdisciplinarity seems to be a broader concept, which is interpreted as the orientation of learning to integrate knowledge of several subjects or academic disciplines in order to form a generalized knowledge of a certain competence. Or hence, interdisciplinarity in our study is a determinant of the integrative approach, or integrativity in turn is an applied mechanism for implementing the principle of interdisciplinarity. It's important for us to indicate competence and competentness. Should be noted that in the methods of teaching foreign languages, these concepts are still new, so they're constantly being rethought and transformed. And following Alexander Ilyich Surygin, we understand competence as the content of education and competentness as the ability of an individual to perform an action, or any action, or actions, activity. However, I cannot but agree, but in some cases, these terms were incorrectly used as synonyms. In my work, we use the terms foreign language communicative competence and linguistic professional competence. And With regard to professional-oriented training of future interpreter guides in foreign language, the linguistic professional competence, in our opinion, is a part of the communicative competence. The structure of the linguistic professional competence of a tour guide is described on pages 52-54. Components of the linguistic professional competence are three sub-competences: the language, speech, and cultural competences, each of which assumes acquisition of knowledge necessary for the effective performance of professional activities, as well as development of relevant skills and abilities, ensuring development of special professional relevant qualities in the personality structure of a future guide. Conditions for formation of the linguistic professional competence of a tour guide are reliance on the student's reflective knowledge and experience in communication in the language study, which serves which to form a professional linguistic motivation to master Russian is necessary for communication. Parameters for assessing the formation of linguistic professional competence, professionally significant qualities of a guide, such as being tolerant, assertiveness, erudition, the ability to solve problems connected with the professional activity of the guide, ability to interact effectively with representatives of other linguistic cultures. As shown by our experiment, the integration of competence training in the process of formalizing the integration of competence, problem context, and ethnocultural approaches is optimal. More attention in our work is paid to the competence approach as it is system forming. The fundamental characteristics of the problem context approach are as follows: imitation training, which ensures the development of certain behavioral skills of professional and social character in situations typical for activity of a guide. Game design, during which students must demonstrate their professional competence and the ability to engage in communication and maintain interpersonal communication to resolve professional issues. Working with texts for reading, in which it's obligatory to have a problem related to the subject of the lesson. Presentation of language phenomena on the study in problematic situations, in accordance with which a selection of intents and language means for their expression is made. Creation of a mini project, the subject of which is as close as possible to the real conditions of the professional activity of a guide. As for the characteristics of the ethnocultural approach, the main one is to take into account the national specifics of the behavior of students. Paragraph 2.1 of the thesis devoted to the description of these characteristics. Our survey of Greek students, future guides and interpreters is aimed at identifying tactics of the Greeks when communicating with the Russian tourists and identifying the national specifics of speech behavior of the Greeks in conflict situations. We didn't set ourselves the task of conducting a large-scale study. In the context of problems of our work, it was important to identify the opinion of only one target professional group. In this case, the survey should not be regarded as a mass survey, but as an expert survey to identify specific and narrow professional problems. And the very formation does not imply a large-scale sample. The studies of this type, qualitative indicators prevail over quantitative ones in significance. All this firstly allows extrapolating the results and conclusions of the empirical research to the whole professional group of guides, and secondly, to consider the sample representative. At the same time, we are well aware that the study of peculiarities of the national communicative behavior of the representatives of Greek culture, of course, cannot be exhausted in this thesis only. I want to emphasize that we are interested not so much in the language training of students to conduct excursions in accordance with the established requirements, but the choice of a way to solve problems that arrives with Russian-speaking tourists in the domestic sphere, hotel, shops, cafes. On the basis of answers we received, we decided that unique characteristics of communicative behavior of Greeks in aspect of activity of the guide are high emotionality, manifested in the use of expressive verbal and non-verbal means, willingness to provide additional services that are not part of the guide's responsibilities, high degree of tolerance, but not when the interlocutor speaks negatively about Greece and the Greeks, refusal to clarify the relationship and active action to extinguish conflicts, and the desire to communicate as such and not just to transmit information. The informant's answers, characterized by a lack of empathy, make up only 0.5% of the total number of reactions, which does not refute the conclusion about the peculiarities of the Greek speech behavior, which is characterized by a positive attitude. Here, I'd like to answer a question, very significant question, which, according to guide, only citizens of any country, not only of Greece or European Union, who are legally resident in Greece, permit in Greek knowledge, the knowledge of Greek language and history, level C1, and getting permission, a future guide has to enroll in pass 34 exams in history, archaeology, philology, and Greek language. Attendance of specific and cultural sites is included in the program of obligatory mandatory training and is part of practical training. 2 years course. And as for the question of forms, method, and techniques of professional-oriented training, we can provide the following explanations. Unfortunately, the term forms of learning, techniques, methods, technology, not clearly defined. Study methods traditionally mean specific actions and operations of the educator, the purpose of which is to communicate knowledge, to form skills and abilities, to stimulate the educational activity of students, to solve private educational tasks. This suggests, for example, that brainstorming can be described as a learning technique. In the Methodological Dictionary of Novikov's, form is considered a device, a structure of something, a system of organization of something, and we absolutely agree with this interpretation. The new Dictionary of Methodological Terms and Concepts by Asimov and Shukin proposes to distinguish the individual, collective, and organizational forms of learning. However, the authors of the dictionary consider, for example, role games as both individual and collective forms, which in our view is not quite logical. Organizational, Asimov and Shukin call the organizational form of learning an externally expressed joint activity of a teacher and student carried out in the prescribed manner and in a certain mode, such as a lesson, audit, practical training, lecture, etc. And if excursion is an auditorium or extracurricular practical lesson, then, in our opinion, an excursion is not a technology, but a form of learning. On pages 55-71, describe the general principles of developing the professionally oriented means of teaching Russian as a foreign language. And these principles determined a description of more specific principles on pages 97-101, refined principles, professionally oriented simulation model realized in the lessons of our textbook, I Am Your Guide for Greek Students. Let me also explain that the paragraph devoted to the experimental testing of the effectiveness of our methodology the formation of linguistic professional competence of a guide. On page 123, 124 contains a table to evaluate the results of final tests with the indication of scores of the parameters of the level of formation of linguistic professional competence. Lexical means, cliches of character, solution of communicative problems, compliance with etiquette norms, expressiveness. The test tasks are related to the professional activity of a guide and interpreter and are presented in the form of professionally significant situations. The maximum score was 3 points. We analyzed results of the students, calculated the scores of each subject, derived an average statistical assessment in percent, and established an increase in the level of linguistic professional competence of the students of the experimental group who used the textbook I'm Your Guide. Comparison of the results of the control experimental groups is shown in figure 2, page 159. And of course, we are familiar with the additional European competencies 2018. In our work, we took into account such provisions of this document as each country should consider its own achievements and traditions in teaching its own language as a foreign language. At different stages of progress towards a higher level of communicative and pragmatic skills, priority is given to the individual structural components of the foreign language competence. The skills of indirect and direct communication and behavior are developed consistently and complement each other. These recommendations are the basis for our textbook, I'm Your Guide. Question was further prospect of our methodology. I believe that this theme can have some potential for research, theoretical and practical. In the theoretical sense, identifying specific features of Greek mentality, professional competence, principles of developing professionally oriented textbooks, clarification of forms and methods of teaching, as we already discussed, and in the practical sense is adaptation of technology, of forming required competencies with maybe further corrections. Are all the comments I accept with sincere gratitude. I'd like to thank once again all the members of the Dissertation Council for their interest in the theme of my study and for valuable remarks, which I will try to take into consideration in my future work. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Zinaida Anatolievna. Dear colleagues, I would like to know if you are satisfied with the answers. Larissa Petrovna, are you satisfied? Please switch the microphone on. Okay. Yes, in general, I am satisfied, but of course, I still have there are still some points which where I have my own opinion, but the author has her own vision of the issue. So I have to be happy to accept an alternative opinion. You don't have to agree with the degree applicant because everyone has the right to his opinion. Nadezhda Ivanovna, are you satisfied with the answers? Yes, in general, I am. And Nina Vitalievna, are you satisfied? Yes, I am. Good. Ekaterina Yurievna, are you satisfied? Yes, thank you. And me personally, I'd like to say, just like Larissa Petrovna, that I agree that a man has the right to have his own opinion, which can be different from mine, and this is normal. Dear colleagues, now let me see if we received any questions online. I think no, no, I don't see anything. Can't see anything. No questions. Natalia Yurivna informed me that we received no questions, which is good. Then let us give the floor to the academic advisor, Nina Leonidovna. Nina Leonidovna, please switch the sound on and tell us about the degree applicant of her work. Do you support all the provisions of the thesis? Which of them, in your opinion, deserve special attention? Leonid Viktorovich, Nina Vitalyevna, she's back. Okay, she's back. Please, Nina Leonidovna. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, I can agree with your overall opinion that the subject of the study is relevant, developed to one of the relevant issues, optimization of training that should ensure achievement of high level of communicative and professional competence, professionally oriented nature, character, because our students are becoming more and more pragmatic, and they want when study in each subject, they want to get something they can use in their future activities. The author of the thesis, in my opinion, proved that integration of the competence ethno-cultural approaches to education enables to increase language competence of Greek-speaking students, of future guides. And here the language aspect is very important because we're talking about interpreters. In addition to that, we cannot but agree that professional oriented in non-language, non-native environment means we have to take into account peculiarities of speech behavior of the students, which should minimize risks and the possibility of not, of course, of conflicts, but as said by Larissa Tro, to break in barriers of intercultural communication. And in addition, moreover, this should lead to efficient communication. Scientific novelty lies in the fact of identifying the problems of teaching issues, clarification of the main principles of professional-oriented training of Russian as foreign language, in addition with requirements of these approaches, structural components of foreign language competence, is future guides, is the theoretical significance of the work is in the fact that the author developed professional-oriented methodology of teaching Greek students, future guides, Russian as a Russian language in the conditions of early specialization, clarify principles of development, professional-oriented textbook, teaching Greek students Russian language in the conditions of non-native language environment, and developed a model for foreign language communicative competencies, future guides. The practical significance of the study is obvious because the author developed a textbook which is already used for training, and that means that it's possible to develop the textbooks for other levels, and the main provisions of the study may serve as a solid methodological basis for creation of various means of training to be used in the non-native language environment. The experiment proved the efficiency of this method, and in general, I think the degree applicant demonstrated good command of the material, different methodological concepts, and ability to find solutions to her tasks independently. Thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, since we are working in the remote access mode, do dissertation council members, or maybe the degree applicant, do you have any unanswered questions related to working in the remote access mode? Do we have any such questions? No. Very well. Now we have to proceed to the next phase of the defense procedure, which is voting. And dear colleagues, before voting, we have the opportunity to take a technical break to discuss the results of the thesis, and the sound shall be switched off. What do you think? Do we need to discuss the results of today's defense? Larissa Petrovna, what do you think? Larissa Petrovna, what do you think? Hold on a second. It's common practice to, so you think we need this discussion. So this is traditionally we do discuss. Nina Vitalyevna, what do you think? I think we have already given our opinions and our reviews, so I think we don't need this discussion. Nadezhda Ivanovna, what do you think? I think I agree with Nina Vitalyevna. We have all expressed our opinions, and the opinions are all positive, and so I don't think we will be able to add something new to our discussion. I think we don't need this discussion. And Ekaterina Yurina, what do you think? I think we don't need any discussion. Okay, let me join my colleagues. So we convinced Larissa Petrovna, and I think we also don't need any time for private discussion because the situation is very clear. We see this is a good work. It deserves recognition, and the drawbacks we have outlined and discussed. And so there are answers. We have answers. Now, colleagues, since we don't have to this private discussion, I put the question of awarding to Stamboleva Zinaida Anatolyevna the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Academic Specialization 130002, Theory and Methods of Training and Education, Russian as a Foreign Language, to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council shall be considered positive if more than a half, but not less than 3 members of the Council participated in the session, voted for it in accordance with Article 23 of the Order. Now let us vote. Council member Tarnaeva Larissa Petrovna, your opinion, please. Are you for awarding the degree? Of course, I am for awarding the degree. I said that in my review. Thank you. Council member Almazova Nadezhda Ivanovna, I am for awarding the degree. Council member Bagramova Nina Vitalyevna, I am for awarding the degree. Council member Protasova Ekaterina Yurievna, I am for awarding the degree. And me, Chairman Moskovkin Leonid Viktorovich, my opinion is also for. Thus, dear colleagues and guests, let me announce that out of 5 members of Dissertation Council members, 5 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. The decision to award to Stamboleva Zinaida Anatolyevna the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Academic Specialization 130002, Theory and Methods of Training and Education, Russian as a Foreign Language, has been made. Dear colleagues, since our meeting was held in the remote access mode, do Dissertation Council members or the degree applicant or other attendees have any questions or comments regarding the procedure of today's meeting? No one has any questions, right? No comments. In that case, I think now we should give the floor to the degree applicant for her closing remarks. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the chairman of the Decision Council, Professor Moskovina Petrovich, dear members, distinguished members, Nadezhda Ivanovna Almazova, Ekaterina Yurievna Protasova, Nina Vitalyevna Bagramova, and Larissa Petrovna Tarnaeva for valuable comments and advice. I would like to sincerely thank my academic advisor, Professor Nina Leonidovna Fedotova, for her guidance, invaluable advice, support, and patience, for being always next to me on this hard path. Let me also thank all the everyone who helped me to prepare for this thesis and who prepared and enabled today's session. And many thanks to my family for being near me. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your attention. Dear Zinaida Anatolievna, I would like, on my behalf and on behalf of other Dissertation Council members, to congratulate you on being awarded the degree of Candidate of Pedagogical Sciences. I think everyone would like to join at that. I would like to thank all the members of the Dissertation Council for very challenging but important work. And at that, I would like to announce our session closed. Please stop the online broadcasting.